I never believed in ghosts. Not because I was brave, not because I was skeptical. I simply spent too much time around death. When you've seen enough bodies, death becomes ordinary, predictable, routine. You stop imagining monsters. You stop believing in supernatural stories. You stop checking dark corners. You stop expecting the dead to do anything at all. That was before I started working at Morgue 13, and before I learned that sometimes death isn't the end of a person. Sometimes it's the beginning of something else. Something much worse. My name is Andrew Warren. In the winter of 2021, I got a job as a night attendant at a county forensic morgue. The pay was surprisingly good. The shifts were quiet, and according to the man who hired me, the dead were easier to deal with than the living. At the time, I thought he was joking. Now I know he wasn't. The building stood nearly half a mile away from the main hospital complex. Nobody ever explained why. Maybe it was because of the smell. Maybe because nobody wanted to look at it. Or maybe because whoever designed the place knew that something was wrong with it from the very beginning. The morgue was old, older than any other structure on the property. A 3-story brick building with boarded windows and rust-covered pipes running along its exterior walls. Even during daylight, it looked abandoned. At night, it looked dead. Most of the letters had fallen off years ago. Only 2 words remained visible. Morgue 13. I remember asking about the number. The administrator ignored the question. The receptionist pretended not to hear it. And the security guard simply shook his head. That should have been my first warning. My supervisor was a man named Gregory Miller. He was 63 years old. Tall, thin, gray-haired, the type of man who looked exhausted, even while standing still, as if he hadn't slept in years. He showed me around during my first shift. The examination rooms, storage areas, refrigeration units, autopsy theater, archive room. Everything seemed normal until we reached the basement. The basement corridor was much longer than it should have been. I know that sounds strange, but after spending enough time in the building, you develop a sense of its layout, and that hallway simply didn't make sense. The building above wasn't large enough to contain that much space below. Yet the corridor continued far beyond where the outer walls should have been. The farther we walked, the colder the air became. At the end stood a massive steel door. Unlike every other door in the facility, it was thick, industrial, almost military in design. 2 chains wrapped around it. 3 heavy padlocks secured it shut. I pointed toward it. "What is that?" Gregory stopped walking. For several seconds, he simply stared at the door. Then he answered, "Old storage room." "What kind of storage room needs 3 locks?" No response. "What's inside?" His expression changed. Not fear exactly. Something worse. Recognition. The look of someone remembering a nightmare. If you ever hear knocking from behind that door, don't walk away. I laughed. He didn't. "Seriously," he said. "Don't investigate, don't answer, don't knock back." Why would I knock back? His eyes met mine. Because somebody always does. For the next 2 weeks, nothing unusual happened. Bodies arrived, paperwork got filed, families came to identify loved ones. The normal cycle of death continued. I began settling into the routine. Night shifts became easy, boring even. Most nights I watched movies on my laptop, while drinking terrible coffee. The silence became comforting, predictable, safe. Then came December 22nd, the night everything changed. A train accident victim arrived shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning. Male, 40s, severe trauma. The body was barely recognizable. The coroner completed the paperwork. We transferred him into Refrigeration Unit 7. Case closed. Or so I thought. At 2:43 in the morning, I heard the first impact. Bang. The sound echoed through the hallway, loud enough to shake the shelves in the break room. I nearly spilled my coffee. At first, I assumed something had fallen. Maybe a metal tray? Maybe a cart? Then it happened again. Bang. This time I recognized the direction. The refrigeration wing. I stood up immediately. The building had gone silent again. The kind of silence that makes every sound feel important. Every step toward the hallway seemed unnaturally loud. My shoes echoed against the tile. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. And then I heard it again. Bang. Unit 7, the one containing the train victim. I stopped walking. Every rational explanation rushed through my mind. Metal contraction, temperature shift, mechanical malfunction. Anything except the obvious possibility. Because the obvious possibility was impossible. The man inside was dead. Very dead. Yet another impact struck the door, hard enough to make the metal vibrate. Bang! This time I ran for Gregory. When we returned, the noise had stopped. Gregory stared at Unit 7 for several seconds, then quietly muttered something under his breath. A prayer, or maybe a curse. I couldn't tell. "Open it," he said. "What?" "Open the drawer." I hesitated. He didn't. Now, my hands shook as I released the latch. The refrigeration drawer slid outward. The body was still there. Motionless, cold, dead, exactly where we had left it. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed the hands. The victim's fingers were now curled over his face, as if he had tried to shield himself from something. Or someone. The problem was simple. When we stored him earlier, his arms had been resting at his sides. I remembered because I had positioned them myself. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Gregory pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and said something that made my blood run cold. Unit 7 woke up again. Again, not for the first time. As if this had happened before. As if everyone knew except me. As if something inside Morgue 13 had been waking up for years. And that was the moment I realized I had made a terrible mistake accepting this job. Because whatever was happening here, it wasn't new.
The two men arrived 20 minutes later. No sirens, no marked vehicle, no identification, just a black SUV that pulled into the rear loading area at exactly 3:07 a.m. I remember the time because Gregory checked his watch the moment the headlights appeared through the snow. And for the first time since I'd met him, he looked nervous. Not concerned, not worried, afraid. The kind of fear you only see when someone knows exactly what's coming. The two men entered through the service entrance without knocking. Both wore dark coats. Both looked to be in their 40s. Neither introduced themselves. The taller one walked directly to Refrigeration Unit 7. He examined the body, pulled back the sheet, studied the victim's face, Then he looked at Gregory. "How long after intake?" "About an hour." The man nodded, as if that confirmed something he already expected. "Take it downstairs." Those were the only words he spoke. Take it downstairs. Not transfer it. Not move it. Not store it. Take it downstairs. As though there was only one destination they could possibly mean. Gregory glanced toward me. I could tell he was debating whether to send me home, whether I had already seen too much. Unfortunately, that decision had already been made. The moment I heard those impacts from inside Unit 7, I had become part of whatever this was, whether I wanted to be or not. The body was loaded onto a transport gurney. One of the men took the front. I took the back. Gregory walked ahead of us. Nobody spoke. The wheels rattled softly against the tile floor. The sound echoed through the empty corridors, past the examination rooms, past the storage wing, past the employee offices, toward the basement. As we descended the concrete stairs, I noticed something strange. The temperature dropped rapidly, not gradually, instantly, like stepping into a freezer. Within seconds, my breath became visible. The air smelled different too. Not formaldehyde, not disinfectant. Something older, something damp, like earth that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. The corridor stretched ahead, long, silent, dimly lit, and waiting at the far end stood the steel door, the same door Gregory had warned me about, the one secured by chains and locks, the one nobody talked about. Gregory removed a ring of keys from his pocket. There were dozens of them. Most were rusted. Some looked ancient. The first lock opened easily. The second required several attempts. The third produced a loud metallic click that echoed down the corridor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It felt wrong somehow, like opening a tomb. Finally, the chains fell away. The steel door swung inward, and I immediately wished it hadn't. The room beyond was enormous, far larger than any space should have been beneath the building. Rows of old refrigeration units lined the walls. Most appeared abandoned. Their metal surfaces were stained with rust. Their identification numbers had faded long ago. The ceiling disappeared into darkness. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the room itself. It was the walls. Every inch of them was covered in writing. Thousands of words, carved directly into concrete. Some messages were scratched deeply, others barely visible. Many overlapped each other, layer upon layer. Years of desperate messages, warnings. Plea after plea. The nearest one read, "Do not listen to them." Another, "It knows your name." A third, "If you hear your voice, run." My stomach tightened. I kept reading. "Don't let them out. They aren't dead. They pretend." And then one phrase repeated everywhere, hundreds of times, maybe thousands, across walls, across doors, across support columns. Always the same words. Always, "It learns. It learns. It learns. It learns." I couldn't stop staring. The message appeared so many times that it looked less like graffiti and more like a warning left by generations of terrified people. The body from Unit 7 was wheeled toward the far side of the chamber. There, isolated from the other refrigeration units, stood a single reinforced compartment. Unlike the others, this one appeared newer. Its steel door was thick, industrial, almost armored. 3 separate locks secured it shut. The taller man unlocked each one carefully. When the door opened, a wave of cold air rolled out. Not normal cold, not refrigeration cold. This felt different, sharper, almost painful, as if the air itself wanted you gone. Inside the compartment was darkness, complete darkness, no lights, no shelves, no visible walls, just blackness. The beam from my flashlight seemed to vanish after a few feet. I couldn't see the back, couldn't judge its size, couldn't even tell whether it was actually a room. For one irrational moment, I felt like I was staring into a hole. Not a chamber, a hole. Something dug deep beneath the earth. Something that shouldn't exist. "Put him inside." The order came from behind me. I hesitated. The darkness beyond the threshold felt alive somehow. Watching, waiting. The sensation was ridiculous, but impossible to ignore. Together we pushed the gurney forward. The wheels crossed the threshold, and that's when it happened. The corpse moved. The right hand twitched. Something just once. A small movement. Barely noticeable. Yet every person in the room saw it. The taller man swore. Gregory went pale, and I froze. Because dead bodies do not twitch hours after death. Not like that. Not deliberately. Not with timing that felt intentional. The fingers curled, slowly, almost thoughtfully, then stopped. Nobody said a word. We shoved the gurney the rest of the way inside. The steel door slammed shut immediately afterward. 3 locks clicked into place. Then came the chains. Only after everything was secured did anyone seem willing to breathe again. The shorter man finally looked at me. His expression was impossible to read. You weren't supposed to see that. I stared back. What is this place? No answer. What was that thing? Still nothing. The 2 men simply turned and walked away, leaving Gregory and me alone. We remained in the basement for several moments. The silence felt oppressive, heavy, like pressure building before a storm. Finally, I looked toward Gregory. I want answers. His face tightened. For a second, I thought he would refuse. Instead, he sighed. Say this love whiz takes me into the surge of someone carrying a burden for far too long. You're not going to quit, are you? I might. No, he shook his head slowly. You won't. There was something strange about the certainty in his voice, as though he'd had this exact conversation before, many times, with many different people, and he already knew how it ended. On our way back upstairs, I noticed something carved into the wall near the basement exit. The words were small, easy to miss, hidden among hundreds of other messages. But for some reason, they caught my eye immediately. Maybe because they were newer. Maybe because they seemed directed at me personally. The carving read, "When they start talking to you, don't answer." I stopped walking. A chill ran down my spine. Who wrote this? Gregory followed my gaze. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered quietly. I did. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the darkness inside that compartment. The impossible blackness. The moving hand. The messages covering the walls. And one question repeated over and over in my head. What exactly were they locking down there? Because I no longer believed it was a body. And deep down, I think Gregory knew that too. 3 nights later, my phone rang at exactly 2:13 a.m. I was alone in the employee break room. The caller ID showed no number, just a blank screen. I answered. At first, there was only static. Then a voice spoke. A weak voice. A frightened voice. A familiar voice. My own. Andrew. The line crackled. I felt every hair on my body stand upright. Andrew, please help me. The voice was identical to mine. Same tone, same accent, same breathing, as though I were listening to a recording of myself. Except I had never spoken those words. And then it whispered something that made my blood freeze. It's dark down here. The call disconnected. And somewhere far below the building, something knocked. Something 3 times. Slow, heavy, deliberate, from behind the locked basement door. For several seconds after the call ended, I remained frozen in my chair. The phone was still pressed against my ear. The screen had gone black. The room was silent. But I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly, because I knew what I had heard. It wasn't similar to my voice. It wasn't close. It wasn't almost identical. It was my voice. Every inflection, every pause, every tiny imperfection, as if someone had somehow recorded my thoughts and played them back to me. The logical part of my brain desperately searched for explanations. A prank, artificial intelligence, a recording, some kind of elaborate joke, but every explanation felt weaker than the last. And deep down, beneath all the rationalizations, another possibility was growing. One I didn't want to acknowledge. One I couldn't stop thinking about. Something in the basement had spoken to me. Then came the knocking. Then came the knocking. 3 slow impacts, far below the building. Thud, 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 thud. Silence. A long pause. Send 3 more. Thud, thud, thud. The sound carried through the pipes and concrete walls. Distant, but unmistakable. I remembered Gregory's warning. If you hear knocking, walk away. Don't answer. Don't investigate. Just leave. For the first time since starting the job, I actually listened. I locked the break room door, turned the television volume up, and spent the next hour pretending I couldn't hear the sounds coming from beneath the floor. The next morning, I confronted Gregory. He listened quietly while I described the phone call. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, didn't look surprised, which somehow terrified me more than anything else. When I finished, he simply nodded. "How long?" he asked. "What? How long have you worked here?" 3 weeks. He sighed. "That's earlier than usual." My stomach tightened. "Earlier than usual?" Again, he nodded. "Most people make it about 2 months." I stared at him. "What exactly starts after 2 months?" He looked away. Toward the hallway. Toward the basement stairs. Then answered. The conversations. But laughed. Not because anything was funny, because I genuinely didn't know how else to react. The conversations, as if hearing impossible voices was a normal workplace issue, as if this happened regularly, as if employees received training on how to deal with supernatural phone calls. The conversations with what? I asked. Gregory rubbed his face. For a moment he looked much older than 63. "They start with voices." He paused. "Then they start asking questions." A cold feeling settled in my chest. "What voices?" "The dead." I expected him to smile, to reveal the joke, to tell me he was messing with the new guy. Instead, he looked completely serious. "I know how that sounds," he continued, "but listen carefully." His voice dropped. "If anything speaks to you, Gregory, I'm serious. If anything speaks to you from downstairs, don't answer questions." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Not if, when. That night, I couldn't focus on work. Every hallway seemed darker. Every sound seemed louder. Every shadow looked wrong. By midnight, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. By 1 a.m, I almost believed everything was normal. Then the body arrived.
Female. Approximately 30 years old. Single vehicle collision. Declared dead at the scene. No unusual injuries. No complications. No mystery. Just another tragedy. Another file. Another number. We processed her quickly. Placed her in refrigeration unit 4. Completed the paperwork and moved on. The entire procedure took less than 20 minutes. Nothing seemed unusual. At first. The security camera alarm activated at 2:37 a.m. A motion alert. Cold storage corridor. There shouldn't have been anyone there. Gregory was upstairs. I was in the records office. The building was otherwise empty. I opened the camera feed and nearly dropped my coffee. A woman stood in the hallway, motionless, facing the camera. Long dark hair, hospital gown, bare feet. The image quality was poor, but I recognized her immediately. The accident victim. The woman who had arrived less than 2 hours earlier. The woman whose body was currently locked inside Unit 4. I stared at the screen. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't sway. She simply stood there, watching the camera, watching me. Then the image flickered. For half a second, the hallway appeared empty. When the picture stabilized, she was closer, much closer. No footsteps, no movement, just suddenly nearer, as if several seconds had been removed from reality. I felt a wave of nausea. The figure tilted her head and smiled. The camera feed died instantly. Static filled the screen. Then darkness. No signal. I jumped to my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to ignore it, to wait for Gregory. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward cold storage, a decision I would regret for years. The corridor was empty. No woman, no movement, no sound. Only silence. The refrigeration units stood exactly where they should. Everything looked normal, except for Unit 4. Its door was slightly open. Not much. Only an inch. But enough. I stopped several feet away. The gap shouldn't have existed. I knew I had secured it myself. The latch was closed, the lock engaged, yet somehow the door stood partially open. A thin line of darkness visible inside. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stepped closer. Slowly, carefully. The smell hit me first. Earth, wet soil, rotting leaves. Not decomposition, not chemicals. Forest soil after heavy rain. Completely impossible. The scent drifted from inside the refrigeration unit. My flashlight beam fell across the opening. The drawer was empty. The body was gone. For several seconds, I simply stared, unable to process what I was seeing, because there are certain things your brain refuses to accept. Corpses don't disappear, they don't get up, they don't walk away, and they certainly don't vanish from locked refrigeration units. Yet the drawer was empty, completely empty. Behind me, very close. I spun around. The corridor was empty. Nothing. Nobody. Yet I knew I had heard it. Slow, human breathing. Close enough to touch. I backed away from Unit 4. The flashlight trembled in my hands. And that's when I noticed something on the floor. Wet footprints. Bare footprints. Leading away from the refrigeration wing, toward the basement stairs. I followed them. Not because I was brave. Because I was terrified. And sometimes fear creates a kind of momentum. You keep moving, because stopping feels worse. The footprints continued down the stairwell, across the concrete floor, toward the basement corridor, toward the locked door, toward the place everyone avoided talking about. Halfway down the corridor, I stopped. The footprints ended. Not faded, not turned.
Ended. As if the person making them had simply ceased to exist. One step, another, then nothing. No return trail, no side path, no explanation, just empty floor. I felt sick. Something moved behind the steel door, a faint scraping sound. Then silence, then a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. Andrew. My blood turned to ice. The voice belonged to the dead woman. I knew it instantly, even though I'd never heard her speak while alive. Somehow I knew. The way people recognize faces in dreams. The certainty was irrational, absolute, and horrifying. Andrew, the whisper came again, closer this time. Almost affectionate. Can you hear me? I took a step backward. The voice laughed softly, not loudly, not maliciously, almost sadly, like someone disappointed. Then it asked a question, a simple question, one that would haunt me for years. Do you know what's underneath us? The lights went out, every single light in the corridor. Instant darkness swallowed everything. The basement vanished. The walls vanished. The floor vanished. Only blackness remained. And somewhere ahead, something began walking toward me. Slowly, one step at a time, bare feet against concrete. Closer, closer, and closer, and closer, until I felt another breath against my ear. A woman's voice whispered, "He's awake now," and all the lights came back on. The corridor was empty. The door remained locked. The footprints were gone. But scratched into the concrete directly in front of me were 3 fresh words. Words that had not been there moments earlier. I know because I was staring at that exact spot. The message read, "He remembers you." I had never seen those words before, which would have been impossible, because whatever had written them somehow already knew my name. I didn't tell anyone about the message. Not immediately. Looking back, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe if I had gone to the police, quit my job, and never returned, things would have ended differently. But when something impossible happens right in front of you, your mind doesn't automatically accept it. It fights. It argues. It argues. It invents explanations. Anything to avoid the truth. So, when I saw the words carved into the concrete floor, "He remembers you," I convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. A prank. A coincidence. A trick of the light. Anything. Everything. Except what I was beginning to suspect. The following morning, I found Gregory in the archive room. He was alone, drinking coffee, reading paperwork. For a while, I simply stood there, watching him, trying to decide whether I should tell him. Eventually, I did. Eventually, I described everything. The missing body. The footprints. The voice. The voice. When I finished, he sat in silence for almost a minute. Then he quietly asked, exactly what words did it use? It asked if I knew what was underneath us. Gregory closed his eyes. The color drained from his face. That reaction scared me more than anything else, because it wasn't surprise. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. "You've heard that before." He nodded. "Many times." My stomach tightened. What does it mean? For several moments, he didn't answer. Finally, he stood up, walked to a filing cabinet in the far corner, unlocked it, then unlocked a second compartment hidden inside, and pulled out a thick cardboard folder. The paper looked ancient, yellowed with age. The cover bore a faded date, 1987. What's this? Gregory placed the folder on the table. His hands were shaking. Not much, but enough for me to notice. "These are the files that disappeared." I frowned. What files? The files nobody was supposed to keep. Inside were photographs, medical reports, incident logs, dozens of documents, some so old they looked ready to fall apart. Most had one thing in common: the names of employees who no longer worked there, and many who were no longer alive. I opened the first report, a night attendant, January 1987. The statement described hearing voices from the basement. At first, the voices sounded like deceased patients. Later, they sounded like family members. Eventually, they sounded like him. Word for word, exactly like my own experience. The second report was worse. A pathology technician claimed a corpse disappeared from storage. Security cameras later showed the body standing in a hallway, watching, waiting, smiling, exactly what I had seen. The third report nearly made me stop reading altogether. The employee who wrote it disappeared 3 days later. Never found. No body, no evidence, nothing, nothing. Just gone.
Sai looked up.
How many people? Gregory didn't need clarification. He already knew what I meant. Officially, yes, 12. And unofficially, a long pause, then closer to 50. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Long pause. I looked back at the files. Every page seemed to tell the same story. Voices, disappearances, moving corpses, the basement, always the basement, always the locked room, always the same progression. First they hear voices.
Then they see people who should be dead.
Then the voices begin using familiar names. Then they start asking questions. Then, and finally, the reports ended. Abruptly, as though the authors never had the opportunity to write another word. Who covered this up? I asked. Gregory laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. Everyone. What? Hospital administration, local authorities, state investigators. He shrugged. They all tried. Tried what? To bury it. He leaned forward. His voice dropped.
You think this building is old?
I nodded.
It isn't.
That caught me off guard. What do you mean? The morgue is old. His expression darkened. But what's underneath it is much older. A cold sensation crawled across my spine. I suddenly remembered the woman's question. Do you know what's underneath us? For the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Gregory opened another folder. Inside were black and white photographs. Much older than the others. Some dated back to the 1940s, others earlier. The images showed excavation crews, construction equipment, workers standing beside enormous pits dug into the earth. One photograph caught my attention immediately. A hole, a massive circular shaft descending into darkness, far larger than anything needed for construction. The workers surrounding it looked tiny by comparison, like ants around an open grave. What is that? Gregory slid the photograph toward me. The reason this place exists. I stared. The image made no sense. The shaft appeared ancient. They weren't man-made. The stone looked worn, weathered, as if it had existed for centuries before anyone discovered it. Maybe longer. The hospital wasn't built here by accident, Gregory continued. The morgue wasn't built here by accident either. His eyes drifted toward the floor, toward whatever existed beneath us. The building was constructed to contain something. I laughed nervously. I wanted him to stop. I wanted him to tell me this was some elaborate joke. Instead, he reached into the folder again and removed a final document. 1 page, handwritten, extremely old. The paper looked more like parchment than modern stationery. At the top was a date, 1903. I read the first line and immediately wished I hadn't. The handwriting belonged to a doctor, a physician stationed on the property before the hospital existed. The entry read, "We have determined that the voices do not originate from the patients. The patients imitate the voices. Something beneath the foundation is teaching them." I read it again, slowly, carefully. The words felt wrong. Teaching them. Teaching what? Teaching who? The next paragraph was worse. The deceased continues speaking for several hours after death. The phenomenon appears stronger in subjects exposed to the lower chamber. Several bodies have demonstrated memory retention beyond biological death. I stopped. My heart was pounding. Memory retention. Beyond death. Impossible. Completely impossible. And yet, every strange event I'd witnessed suddenly seemed connected. Then I reached the final sentence. The sentence Gregory had wanted me to see. The sentence that changed everything. The intelligence below does not consume bodies, it consumes identities. The room went silent. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. Because for the first time since arriving at Morgue 13, I understood something. The moving corpses, they weren't hauntings. They weren't ghosts. Something was learning people, studying them, copying them, perfecting them, like an actor rehearsing a role. And suddenly a horrifying thought entered my mind. The voice on the phone, the one that sounded exactly like me. What if it hadn't been imitating me? What if it had already learned me? A loud crash echoed somewhere upstairs. Both of us jumped. The sound came from the refrigeration wing, metal striking metal, hard. And another. Bang, bang, bang. The noise continued, louder each time, like someone desperately trying to get out. Gregory stood instantly. His face had gone white. No. The word came out as a whisper, a terrified whisper. What is it? He didn't answer. He was already moving, running toward the door. I followed. The archive room disappeared behind us as we sprinted through the corridor, past storage, past administration, toward refrigeration. The impacts grew louder, closer, more frantic. When we rounded the corner, we both stopped dead. Every refrigeration drawer stood open. Every single one. One after another, dozens of them, pulled completely outward, empty, all of them. The bodies were gone, every last one. And written across the far wall in fresh red letters were 6 words, words neither of us had ever seen before. Words that looked as though they had been written by dozens of hands at once. The message read, "We remember who we were." And beneath it, something moved in the darkness at the end of the hall.
For a moment, neither Gregory nor I moved. The refrigeration wing had become impossibly silent. Not normal silence, not the absence of sound. This felt different. Heavy, watching, waiting. Every drawer stood open. Every body was gone. Every body was gone. And at the end of the hallway, something had moved. Every drawer stood open. A subtle shift inside the darkness, enough to convince me that we weren't alone. Gregory's breathing sounded unnaturally loud. I glanced at him. His face had turned grey, not pale, grey. Like all the blood had drained from his body at once. And then he whispered something. A single sentence. Something I don't think he intended me to hear. They've never all left before. The words hit me like ice water. Never all left before. Not they can't, not this is impossible, before. Meaning this had happened. Meaning bodies had disappeared before. Meaning whatever nightmare was unfolding had a history. The lights flickered overhead. Once, twice, then stabilized. The movement at the end of the corridor stopped. Nothing emerged. Nothing spoke. The darkness simply remained, patient, like a predator waiting for prey to approach. Call security. Gregory's voice sounded strained. I reached for my phone. No signal. 0 bars. I frowned. That wasn't possible. The building normally had full reception. I tried again. Nothing. Gregory checked his own phone. Same result. No service. No connection. No emergency calls. Nothing. The entire building had gone dark in ways that had nothing to do with electricity. Then we heard footsteps. Soft, slow, coming from somewhere ahead. A single pair, bare feet against tile. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the refrigeration wing, approaching steadily. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. The footsteps continued. Neither of us moved. Closer and closer and closer and closer until a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the woman from the car accident. The one from Unit 4. The one who had disappeared. At least it looked like her. Mostly. She stood motionless beneath the fluorescent lights. Hospital gown. Mostly wet hair,
pale skin, but something wasn't right. The proportions felt wrong, subtly wrong, like a sculpture created by someone who had only heard descriptions of human anatomy. Her smile was too wide, her eyes didn't blink, and her head tilted at an angle no neck should comfortably allow. For several seconds she simply stared at us, then she spoke.
"Hello, Gregory." The voice sounded normal. Almost, except for a faint distortion underneath, like multiple people speaking simultaneously from very far away. Gregory didn't answer. The woman's smile widened. Still afraid, silence. After all these years, nothing. The figure laughed softly. Then for the first time, I noticed something horrifying. The laugh wasn't hers. Halfway through the sound, another voice emerged. A male voice, then a child's voice, then an elderly woman's voice. Staring and all layered together. Blending. Mixing. Like dozens of identities occupying the same mouth.
I took a step backward. The figure immediately turned toward me. Its eyes locked onto mine, and suddenly, the smile vanished. Now it looked curious, interested, like a scientist examining a specimen. Andrew. Hearing my name made my stomach drop. I had never met this woman while she was alive, never spoken to her, never introduced myself. Yet she knew exactly who I was. Then she said something even worse. "You're learning faster than the others." The hallway temperature plummeted. My breath became visible instantly. The fluorescent lights dimmed, and every instinct in my body screamed one thing: run. Gregory apparently felt the same, because he grabbed my arm, hard. "Don't talk to it." The woman smiled again. "It's rude to interrupt." Her voice changed. Now it sounded exactly like Gregory, perfectly. Every detail, every inflection, every pause. It was impossible. For the first time, genuine terror crossed Gregory's face. Not fear, not anxiety, terror, the kind that strips away reason. The kind that leaves only instinct. The kind that says you're standing in front of something fundamentally wrong. The figure took a step forward. Its bones cracked loudly. The sound echoed through the hallway. Another step. More cracking. As if its body was rearranging itself while it moved, adjusting, improving, learning. Then another figure emerged from the darkness behind it. And another. And another. My heart nearly stopped, because I recognized them, all of them. Bodies from the refrigeration units, patients, victims, people who should have been lying motionless inside steel drawers. Instead, they stood in the corridor, watching us, smiling, waiting. There were at least 15, maybe 20. Men, women, young, old, different injuries, different causes of death. All standing together in absolute silence, like an audience. And every one of them was smiling. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run. But fear rooted me in place, because there was something deeply wrong about the way they stood. Not like humans, not quite. Their balance seemed off, their posture imperfect, like marionettes operated by invisible strings, or creatures attempting to imitate human behavior without fully understanding it. The first figure raised its head, then spoke. "We remember." The others repeated it, simultaneously. "We remember." 100 voices, one sentence. The sound nearly broke me, because some voices were young, some old, some male, some female, and hidden among them, I heard my own. My blood froze. I heard myself speaking from somewhere inside the crowd, exactly like the phone call, exactly like me. The figure continued. "We remember who we were." Another chorus. "We remember." Then silence.
Something changed in Gregory. I saw it immediately.
The fear disappeared, not because he felt safer, because he'd made a decision, a terrible decision. Andrew, his voice was calm now, too calm. Listen carefully. What? When I tell you to run, my stomach dropped. No, run, no, don't stop. The crowd of dead bodies began moving forward, slowly, almost casually, like people approaching an old friend. Gregory, he pulled a key from his pocket, a strange key, long, black.
Same key
I'd seen attached to the hidden archive cabinet. The same key he'd never let anyone touch. The first figure noticed it immediately. For the first time, its smile vanished. Its expression changed. Not fear. Something close. Something close. Recognition. The hallway lights flickered violently. Every corpse froze. The air vibrated, like distant thunder, like something enormous shifting beneath the earth. Then everybody spoke at once, not shouting, whispering.
Thousands of whispers overlapping.
One sentence, repeated endlessly. No, 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 no. Gregory looked toward the basement, toward the locked chamber, toward whatever existed beneath Morgue 13. And suddenly, I understood. The key wasn't for a door. It was for something much worse. The floor shook. Hard. Ceiling dust rained down. Somewhere below us, metal screamed. A deep, grinding sound echoed through the building, like machinery that hadn't moved in decades.
Or chains being dragged across stone.
Huge chains. Impossible chains. The dead figures stopped smiling. Now they looked frightened. Genuinely frightened. Now every single one, including the thing pretending to be the woman from Unit 4. And for the first time since I'd met it, the creature took a step backward. Whatever was beneath the morgue, it was afraid too. Then came the sound, a roar, not an animal, not human, something ancient, something vast, something awakening.
The noise erupted from below the building.
And every corpse in the hallway turned toward the basement simultaneously. Like worshippers hearing the voice of a god. The creature looked at me one final time, and in my own voice it whispered, "You should have left when you had the chance." The lights exploded. Every bulb in the corridor shattered at once. Glass rained through darkness. The building plunged into blackness, and somewhere beneath us, something began climbing upward.
Darkness swallowed the hallway. Not ordinary darkness, not the simple absence of light. This felt alive, thick, oppressive, as though the building itself had inhaled and was holding its breath. For several seconds, all I could hear was shattered glass settling across the floor. Then came another sound, a sound I still hear in my nightmares, something climbing, far below us, deep beneath the foundation, slow, heavy, deliberate. Each movement echoed through the structure. Not exactly. More like immense weight dragging itself upward through stone. The dead figures in the corridor had stopped advancing. They weren't looking at us anymore. Every one of them faced the basement stairwell, motionless, listening, waiting. Fear radiated from them, and that terrified me more than anything, because until that moment, I'd assumed they were the predators. Now it was becoming clear they were prey too. The beam cut through the darkness. His face looked older than ever, exhausted, defeated, like a man who had spent decades delaying an inevitable disaster and had finally run out of time. "It's awake." The words barely escaped his lips. "What is?" For several seconds he didn't answer. Then, the reason this place exists. Another violent tremor shook the building. Somewhere downstairs, metal screamed. The sound reminded me of ship hulls tearing apart under pressure. Impossible. Whatever was moving beneath us was enormous, far larger than any living thing should have been. The dead woman from Unit 4 suddenly turned toward us. Her eyes were wide now. No smile, no confidence, only panic. For the first time, she looked genuinely human, or at least capable of fear. "Lock it again." The voice emerged from her mouth, but it wasn't hers. Dozens of voices spoke simultaneously. Children, adults, elderly men, elderly women, hundreds of overlapping identities, all pleading, "Please, lock it. Don't let it out." Gregory stared at her. His expression hardened. "No." The figure flinched, as if struck. Then something remarkable happened. The bodies began arguing. Not with us, with each other. One corpse screamed, "Seal it!" Another shouted, "No!" A third laughed hysterically. A fourth started crying. Voices erupted everywhere. Different personalities, different memories, different emotions, all trapped inside the same collective nightmare. And suddenly, I understood. Not completely, but enough. The thing beneath the morgue wasn't controlling them. Not directly. It was using them. Like storage. Like containers. Like copies. Fragments of people. Fragments of identities. Pieces that remained after death. The realization made me sick, because it explained the message. We remember who we were. They weren't lying. Some part of them genuinely remembered. Some fragment of the original person still existed. Still trapped. Still aware. Still suffering. Stronger this time. Concrete cracked beneath our feet. The lights remained dead. Only Gregory's flashlight illuminated the corridor. Then we heard another noise. A metallic crash from somewhere above us, followed by another, and another, coming from every floor simultaneously. Doors opening, hundreds of doors, storage doors, office doors, examination rooms, maintenance access points. Every locked compartment in the building seemed to be opening at once. A word I'd never heard him use before. A genuinely frightened sound. Then he turned toward me. "We don't have much time." "What is it?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Gregory stared at me, and finally told me the truth, or at least part of it. In 1903, they found a chamber. Another tremor interrupted him. He ignored it. They were digging foundations for a small hospital. The flashlight beam trembled slightly. Then they broke through. Broke through what? Then, something ancient. The corridor seemed colder now. Every breath hurt. They thought it was a cave at first. Gregory continued. A natural formation. But the deeper they explored, his voice faltered. The less sense it made. He swallowed. Hard. The walls weren't stone. What were they? Gregory looked directly at me. I don't know. The answer frightened me more than certainty would have. Nobody knew. They brought geologists, engineers, archaeologists, military specialists. He shook his head. Nothing matched. The chamber extended far below the earth, much deeper than it should have. And at the center, they found something. Not a creature, not an artifact, not a machine. A voice. I stared. What? Gregory nodded slowly. A voice. The absurdity of the statement hung in the air, yet somehow, I believed him. Because after everything I'd witnessed, it sounded more plausible than any normal explanation. A voice speaking from the darkness, he continued. Nobody ever found the source, only the sound. It knew things, names, memories, secrets. My stomach tightened. People started disappearing, Gregory said quietly. Then they started coming back. The dead figures around us listened in silence, almost reverently. They looked normal, Gregory continued. They acted normal. They remembered everything. Another pause. At first, a chill crawled through me because I already knew where this was going. Eventually, something changed. Small things, then larger things. People forgot childhood memories, forgot family members, forgot who they were. And as their identities disappeared, the voice below became stronger. The implications hit me immediately. It was taking them, not their bodies, their selves. Another violent impact echoed from beneath the floor. Closer now, much closer. The dead figures collectively stepped backward, every one of them, as though retreating from an approaching storm. Gregory looked toward the basement, then back at me. Then another agency took over. They tried explosives. They tried flooding. They tried collapsing the tunnels. Nothing worked. The chamber always remained. The voice always returned. And eventually they realized something horrifying. The thing below wasn't alive. At least not in any way they understood. It didn't think like an organism. Didn't behave like an organism. Didn't even seem bound by normal concepts of time. It simply learned. The words struck me immediately. The warnings, the messages, the writing on the walls. It learns. Now I finally understood. It learns identities. Gregory nodded. That's all it does. It studies people. It copies them. It becomes them. The corridor fell silent. Even the dead bodies seemed frozen. Listening, waiting. Then Gregory said the sentence that would haunt me forever. The sentence that explained everything. It doesn't know what a human is. My blood ran cold. It only knows what humans leave behind. Another tremor. The walls cracked. Dust filled the air. Somewhere below us, something massive shifted. And then, a new voice echoed through the building. Not from the corpses, not from Gregory, not from anywhere visible. A deep voice, ancient, calm, curious, and impossibly familiar, because it sounded exactly like my father. My father who had died 14 years earlier. The voice echoed through every corridor simultaneously, through every vent, every wall, every floor. One sentence, only one. Andrew. I froze. The voice spoke again. Come downstairs. The dead bodies immediately lowered their heads, like worshippers before a king. Gregory's face went white, because whatever had been sleeping beneath Morgue 13, whatever had spent more than a century learning humanity, had finally decided to speak directly to me. And somehow, it already knew exactly who I missed most. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Forgot the morgue, forgot the corpses, forgot the impossible nightmare unfolding around me. Because the voice I had just heard belonged to my father. Perfectly. Not an imitation, not something close, not something that merely resembled him. It was him. Or at least every memory I had of him. The way he pronounced my name, the slight roughness in his voice, the calm certainty he always carried, the exact tone he used whenever he wanted my attention. For one terrifying moment, I almost answered. Gregory grabbed my shoulder, hard. The sudden pain snapped me back to reality. Don't. His voice came out as a whisper, a desperate whisper. Whatever happens, don't answer it. The voice echoed again, not louder, closer, as if the speaker had somehow moved through the walls, moved through the darkness, moved through the building itself. Andrew. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I wasn't standing in Morgue 13 anymore. I was 8 years old. The memory appeared so vividly, it felt real. A fishing trip. Early morning fog. My father sitting beside me on the dock, smiling. I could smell the lake, feel the wind, hear the water against the wooden supports. Every detail was perfect. Impossible, yet perfect. Then the memory shifted. Subtly at first. Then, more obviously. Something was wrong. The sky looked darker. The water wasn't moving correctly. My father's smile remained frozen, too long. Several seconds, too long. And then he said something he had never said in real life. Come find me. The memory shattered. I opened my eyes. Back in the corridor, back in the morgue, back inside the nightmare. Gregory looked terrified. Not because of what I'd seen, because he already knew what was happening. It's inside your head now. The words barely escaped his mouth. What is? His answer came immediately. The conversation. Another tremor shook the building. This one stronger than all the others. Concrete cracked somewhere overhead. The dead figures around us recoiled. Several actually stumbled backward, fear spreading through the crowd. Then, something unexpected happened. The woman from Unit 4 spoke again. But now, Her voice sounded different, weaker, more human. "Don't listen to him." Gregory froze. So did I. The woman took another step forward. Her body twitched unnaturally, as though multiple people were fighting for control. Then she spoke again. "My name." Struggling. "My name is Sarah." The word seemed difficult for her, painful, like someone trying to remember a forgotten language. "My name is Sarah Bennett." Tears suddenly appeared in her eyes. Real tears. "I died 3 days ago." Silence consumed the corridor. For the first time since seeing the dead rise from storage, I wasn't looking at a monster. I was looking at a victim. Something inside her was still there, still trapped, still conscious. And, judging by Gregory's expression, he understood that too. Sarah looked directly at me. "It's learning faster." "What is?" The answer came immediately. "You." My stomach dropped. The crowd behind her shifted uneasily. Dozens of dead faces staring toward the basement, toward the unseen thing beneath the morgue. Sarah swallowed. "When it notices someone," her voice cracked, "it studies them." The lights flickered briefly. "It starts with memories." Another flicker. Then emotions. The corridor temperature continued falling. Then identity. I didn't like where this was going. Not at all. "What happens after that?" I asked. For several seconds, she couldn't answer. When she finally did, her voice was barely audible. "It replaces you." The words landed like a physical blow. Behind us, something enormous shifted beneath the building. Closer now. Much closer. The dead bodies collectively flinched. Gregory looked toward the basement, then back toward Sarah. "How long?" She understood the question immediately. The answer came in a whisper. "Not long." Then, she added, "It already knows his father's voice." Every muscle in my body tightened, because she was right. The entity had never met my father. He died 14 years earlier, long before I ever arrived at the morgue, long before I even knew this place existed. Yet somehow it knew him perfectly, which meant something much worse. The thing wasn't learning from observation. It was learning directly from me, from my memories, my thoughts, my mind. The realization made me physically ill. Another voice suddenly echoed through the corridor. This one came from the crowd. An elderly man stepped forward, a corpse with sunken cheeks and gray skin. "I remember." Another stepped forward. "So do I." Then another, and another, and another. One by one, the dead began speaking, not as a collective, as individuals. Fragments of identity surfacing through whatever controlled them. My daughter was named Emily. I worked construction. My wife played piano. I had a dog. My son hated vegetables. Hundreds of memories. Hundreds of lives. Hundreds of people desperately trying to remember who they were. The hallway filled with human voices. Real voices. Broken voices. Dying voices. And for a moment, something remarkable happened. The entity's control weakened. The crowd seemed less coordinated, less unified, less certain. His eyes widened. They're fighting back. The realization spread through the corridor. Even the dead seemed surprised. For the first time, the thing beneath the morgue wasn't completely in control. And that's when it got angry. The roar that followed shook the entire building. Not sound, not exactly. Something deeper. A vibration that resonated through bone and memory. Through thought itself. Several corpses collapsed instantly. Others screamed. Some began bleeding from their eyes. The lights exploded again. Darkness swallowed everything. And then I heard it. Not with my ears. Inside my head. A voice. Ancient. Endless. Impossible. Not pretending anymore. Not using my father. Not using anyone. Its real voice. And for a single horrifying moment, I understood why nobody had ever destroyed it. Because it wasn't trapped beneath the morgue. The morgue had been built around it. Like a cage. Like a lid placed over something far older than humanity. Far older than language. Far older than memory itself. And the thing spoke directly into my mind. Not in words, in understanding. A terrible understanding. A truth so vast that my brain could barely process it. Then one sentence formed from the chaos. One sentence that shattered everything I thought I knew. I do not copy the dead. The darkness seemed to pulse. The entity continued. The dead copy me. And somewhere beneath Morgue 13, something finally reached the bottom of the staircase. The darkness lasted only a few seconds, but those seconds felt endless, because after hearing the entity's true voice, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Not in the building, not in the basement, in me. The sentence echoed through my mind, again, and again, and again. I do not copy the dead. The dead copy me. The words didn't make sense, at least not yet. But deep inside, some primitive part of my brain already understood, and that understanding terrified me. The emergency lights finally activated. Dim red illumination flooded the corridor. Everything looked wrong beneath that crimson glow. The walls, the corpses, the blood, even Gregory. The dead who had been standing moments earlier now looked frightened, truly frightened. Some had collapsed to their knees. Others pressed themselves against the walls, as if trying to get farther away from whatever was climbing beneath us. Sarah was staring toward the basement stairs, her face frozen in horror. "It's coming." The words barely escaped her lips. Another tremor shook the building, much stronger than before. A crack appeared in the ceiling above us. Dust rained downward. Chunks of concrete followed. Somewhere below, metal snapped. A deafening sound, like enormous chains breaking apart, one after another. Clang, clang, clang. The noise echoed through every floor, every hallway, every room. Gregory closed his eyes. God help us. Then he did something completely unexpected. He started walking toward the basement. I grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" He looked exhausted. Not scared anymore, just tired. The tiredness of a man who had spent decades waiting for this exact moment. Ending it. "You don't even know what it is." His answer came instantly. "No." Another tremor. "But I know what happens if nobody goes down there." The dead bodies around us began backing away, retreating deeper into the corridor, away from whatever was approaching. Sarah looked directly at me, and for the first time since meeting her, I saw genuine desperation. Don't let him go alone. I wish I could say I hesitated, that I considered running, that survival crossed my mind. It didn't. Maybe curiosity had finally overcome fear. Or maybe the thing beneath the morgue had already gotten inside my head. Either way, I followed Gregory. The staircase descended farther than I expected, farther than it should have. The basement level disappeared above us. Then the concrete walls changed. Modern construction gave way to older stone, ancient stone, dark, uneven, covered with symbols worn smooth by time. The air grew colder with every step. Eventually, the stairwell opened into a tunnel that definitely did not appear on any blueprint. The walls curved unnaturally. Not carved, not built, grown. At least that's how they looked. Gregory stopped beside an old steel gate. The same black key appeared in his hand. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he spoke. I was 23 when I first came down here. I looked at him. He had never talked about himself before. Not once. There were 4 of us. His voice echoed softly through the tunnel. 3 doctors. 1 security officer. Another pause. We thought we were investigating reports. A bitter laugh escaped him. We thought we were scientists. The key slid into the lock. The gate opened. Only Gregory didn't move immediately. Instead, he continued talking.
Because I think he knew this might be the last conversation he would ever have. We found the chamber. The tunnel beyond the gate vanished into darkness. And inside it, his voice faltered. We found ourselves. Every hair on my body stood upright. What does that mean? Gregory looked at me. For several seconds, he seemed unsure whether to answer. Then he did. It doesn't steal identities. My stomach tightened. It creates them. The words hung in the darkness. And suddenly, I remembered the entity's statement. The dead copy me. Not the other way around. Not imitation. Origin. The implication was impossible, yet horrifyingly logical, yet
What are you saying? Gregory swallowed. The thing below isn't learning humanity. Silence. It's teaching humanity. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because suddenly every impossible event started fitting together. The voices, the memories, the identities, the dead remembering fragments of themselves.
Not because the entity stole them, because those fragments had come from it originally, like echoes returning to their source. Another tremor exploded beneath our feet. Closer now, much closer. The tunnel ahead illuminated briefly, not with electricity, not with fire, not with fire. Something deeper. A pale white glow pulsing somewhere in the darkness. Like a heartbeat. Gregory stared toward it and whispered, "It's awake." We continued forward. The tunnel widened gradually. The stone walls curved outward. The temperature dropped below freezing. My breath formed clouds before my face. Then the passage ended. Then I saw the chamber. I wasn't prepared. No human being could have been. The cavern stretched beyond sight. Far larger than the morgue itself. Far larger than the entire hospital complex. Far larger than the town. Impossible. Yet there it was. An underground void hidden beneath reality. At the center stood something that looked almost human. Almost. The shape was enormous. Hundreds of feet tall. Maybe more. Impossible to judge in the darkness. Its body appeared unfinished. Faces emerged from its surface. Far thousands of faces. Men, women, children, elderly. Say something random. Every ethnicity. Every age. Every expression. And they were moving. Not independently. Like thoughts passing through a single mind. Faces appearing, disappearing, changing, becoming one another. The sight shattered something inside me, because I recognized some of them. My father, Sarah, the train victim, Gregory, even myself. Faces flowing endlessly across the enormous form, like identities drifting through an ocean. Then one face turned toward us, then mine. A perfect copy of my face. And it smiled, not maliciously, sadly, as though it pitied me. The chamber vibrated. A voice filled the cavern. Not spoken, felt. You finally came. I collapsed to one knee. The pressure inside my head became unbearable. Images flooded my mind. Ancient civilizations, forgotten cities, stone temples beneath oceans, people standing before the same entity thousands of years ago, listening, learning, praying, not worshipping a god, learning how to be human. The realization struck with devastating force. Humanity hadn't discovered the thing. Humanity had inherited something from it. Language, memory, identity, all of it. All somehow, somewhere, long before history began. And now it was remembering. The chamber shook violently. The faces across the entity's surface opened their eyes simultaneously. Thousands of eyes, all staring directly at me. Then the voice spoke again. And this time it asked a question. A simple question. The same question that had echoed through the entire story from the beginning. The same question hidden behind every voice, every corpse, every memory. Do you remember where you came from? And for one terrible moment, I almost did. I almost remembered. That's the part that still terrifies me. Not the chamber, not the creature, not the thousands of faces flowing across its impossible body. The memory. Because for a fraction of a second, standing in that vast underground void, I felt something awakening inside me. Something ancient, something buried, something that had been waiting a very long time to be remembered. The entity's question echoed through the cavern. Do you remember where you came from? Pain exploded behind my eyes. Not physical pain, something deeper, as though invisible fingers had reached into my mind and begun pulling apart the walls between memories. Images flooded my consciousness. Not dreams, not hallucinations. Memories. Memories. Except they weren't mine. I saw a shoreline beneath a black sky. Strange stars hung overhead. Constellations I didn't recognize. The ocean glowed with pale blue light. Thousands of people stood silently along the beach, watching something emerge from the water. The vision lasted only a moment. Then another replaced it. A city, ancient beyond comprehension. Massive towers carved from white stone, structures larger than mountains. Crowds filling enormous streets. Crowds filling enormous streets. Millions of people, all staring toward a single distant shape, a shape hidden behind impossible brightness. Then another memory, and another, and another, and another. Civilizations rising, civilizations falling. Empires forgotten by history, languages that no longer existed, faces that had been dust for thousands of years. I saw them all, for an instant, and every one of them seemed connected to the thing standing in the center of the chamber. Then the vision stopped. Then I collapsed onto the cold stone floor, gasping for breath. Gregory was beside me immediately. His face looked terrified. Not for himself, for me. What did you see? The question came out almost desperate. Say something. I tried answering. Couldn't. Words felt inadequate. Meaningless. Meaningless. Finally, I managed. I think. My voice shook. I think I've seen it before. Gregory closed his eyes, as if that was exactly the answer he'd been afraid of. No. The word escaped him as a whisper. No, no, no. The giant figure at the center of the cavern remained motionless, thousands of faces drifting across its surface, watching, waiting, patient, and suddenly I noticed something strange. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at Gregory. The realization sent a chill through me, because the expression on the faces wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. Like two old acquaintances meeting again after many years apart. The entity spoke. Gregory. His name echoed throughout the cavern. The old man visibly flinched. 43 years. Silence. Then Gregory laughed. Then a tired laugh. A defeated laugh. Long enough. My heart skipped a beat. Because he wasn't acting confused.
He wasn't asking what the thing was. He was talking to it, like someone speaking to an old enemy, or an old friend. The distinction suddenly felt important. What is it talking about? I asked. Gregory didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left the enormous figure. Finally, he sighed. 43 years ago. The cavern trembled softly. I came down here. Another pause, and I spoke to it. The confession hit me like a punch. The thing beneath the morgue seemed almost pleased. Thousands of faces smiling faintly. Gregory continued. There were 4 of us. His voice echoed across the vast chamber. The others wanted answers. Another pause. I wanted proof. The old man laughed bitterly. I got both. I stared. What happened? For several seconds, he simply stood there, remembering. Then he answered. We asked questions. The entity remained silent. We wanted to understand what it was. His expression darkened. That was the mistake. A cold sensation crawled through my chest, because I already knew where this was going. Every warning, every message on the walls, every employee report. Don't answer questions, not because the entity wanted information, because questions created connections, conversations, relationships, pathways. It doesn't force itself into your mind. He pointed toward the giant shape. You invite it. Silence filled the cavern. Then he added, every answer opens a door. The realization struck me immediately. The voices, the phone calls, the conversations, the dead asking questions. They weren't random encounters. They were invitations. And every time someone responded, the connection deepened. The entity spoke again. You learned that too late. Yes. The simple honesty of the response surprised me. The two of them sounded less like enemies now, more like participants in an old argument, one that had lasted decades. Then Gregory looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine guilt in his eyes. There was a fifth person. The statement caught me off guard. What? His voice faltered. A fifth member of the team. Silence. He wasn't supposed to come. The giant figure remained motionless. Gregory looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He was my brother. Something inside me tightened. The old man rarely spoke about himself. Almost never. Yet now his voice sounded fragile. We came down here together. The cavern seemed colder. We left separately. Another pause. At least, his throat tightened. I thought we did. The implication hit me immediately. Gregory's brother never truly left. Or something wearing his identity did. The entity spoke softly. He asked to remember. Gregory's face twisted. Pain, regret, anger, all at once. Stop. He wanted answers. Stop. He chose. Stop. The word echoed violently through the chamber. For the first time, the old man lost control. And suddenly, I understood. Gregory hadn't spent 43 years guarding this place because of duty, or responsibility, or fear. He stayed because of guilt. Because whatever happened down here, he believed it was his fault. The cavern trembled. The entity's countless faces shifted, flowed, changed. And among them, one face emerged. A man in his 20s. Dark hair, kind eyes, a faint resemblance to Gregory, his brother. The face smiled sadly and whispered, "Hello, Greg." The old man staggered backward, as if physically struck. The face vanished again, lost among thousands of others. But the damage was done, because Gregory had just seen someone he'd spent 4 decades mourning. And deep down, I think part of him wanted to believe it was real. The entity turned its attention back to me. Thousands of eyes, focusing simultaneously. And once again, I felt memories stirring beneath the surface of my mind. Ancient, impossible, waiting. Then it asked another question, a simple question, a dangerous question. Would you like to remember? Every instinct screamed at me not to answer. Every warning I'd ever received echoed through my head. Don't answer. Don't engage. Don't continue the conversation. But beneath the fear, another feeling was growing. Curiosity. A part of me already knew the answer. And the worst part? I wasn't entirely sure that answer was no. I didn't answer. Not immediately. Every warning I'd heard since arriving at Morgue 13 was screaming through my mind. Don't answer questions. Don't continue the conversation. Don't let it inside. And yet standing there in that impossible cavern, staring at the thing beneath the morgue, I finally understood why so many people had failed. Why doctors, scientists, investigators, soldiers, why generation after generation had ignored every warning. Because the entity never offered power, never offered wealth, never promised immortality. It offered something far more dangerous. Answers. The face of Gregory's brother had vanished back into the endless sea of shifting identities. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about it. If the entity was lying, it was doing so perfectly. If it was telling the truth, the implications were unbearable. The giant shape waited patiently, not demanding, not threatening, simply waiting, as though time meant nothing to it, as though it could stand there for another 1,000 years if necessary. Finally, Gregory spoke. Don't. His voice sounded exhausted. Whatever it shows you. He swallowed. Don't look. The entity's countless faces turned toward him. You looked. The old man laughed bitterly. Yes. And you stayed. Another silence. Then Gregory answered with words that chilled me. I never really left. The cavern seemed to darken, and suddenly I realized something. Something I should have understood much earlier. Gregory wasn't guarding the chamber. The chamber was guarding Gregory. The thought struck me with terrible force. For 43 years he had remained here, never retiring, never leaving, never moving on, as if some invisible thread connected him to the thing below, as if part of him already belonged to it. The entity spoke again. You understand now. The words were directed at me, and horrifyingly, it was right. A piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place. This wasn't a prison, at least not in the way people assumed. The locks, the chains, the reinforced chambers, the security systems, none of them were designed to keep the entity inside. They were designed to keep people away from it. Because exposure was the danger, knowledge was the danger, memory was the danger. The realization made my stomach turn. Then, the floor shook. A deafening crack echoed through the cavern. This time something actually broke, far above us. The sound of collapsing concrete rolled through the underground void. Gregory immediately looked upward. No, the word escaped him instinctively. Another crash followed, then another. The morgue was failing. After more than a century, whatever containment existed above was finally giving way. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Small stones followed. The entity remained completely motionless, as though none of it mattered, because maybe it didn't. Then something emerged from the darkness behind us. A voice. Andrew. Sarah stood at the entrance to the cavern. But she wasn't alone. Hundreds of others stood behind her. The dead. Every missing body. Every stolen identity. Every victim who had vanished from the morgue. An endless crowd stretching back into the tunnel. And unlike before, they looked human. Truly human. No unnatural smiles, no distorted movements, no obvious signs of control. Just frightened people. People who happened to be dead. Sarah stepped forward. You have to leave. The urgency in her voice felt genuine. Now. The entity did not react. It simply watched. Thousands of eyes fixed upon us. Said the giant figure. It isn't what you think. A strange expression crossed the entity's countless faces. Not anger, sadness. And that terrified me more than rage ever could. Because for the first time, it looked lonely. The thought felt insane, yet impossible to ignore. It doesn't know how to stop. The statement echoed through the cavern. The dead behind her lowered their heads, as if they already understood. The entity spoke softly. Neither do you. Silence followed. Then Sarah began crying. Not dramatically, not hysterically, quietly, like someone grieving something beyond words. And suddenly I understood that she wasn't arguing with it. She was mourning it. The realization sent a chill through me. Because monsters weren't supposed to inspire pity. Yet standing there surrounded by the dead, I found myself wondering if the thing beneath the morgue might be suffering too. Then another memory hit me. Without warning, without permission, a vision. This one stronger than before, much stronger. The cavern disappeared, the dead disappeared, the entity disappeared. And I was somewhere else, somewhere impossible. Darkness stretched forever. Not empty darkness, living darkness. A place before stars, before planets, before life. A place before memory. And in that darkness, something existed alone. Not a creature, not a god, not a mind in any human sense. a pattern, a vast intelligence searching for definition, searching for identity, searching for understanding. And eventually, it found humanity. The vision intensified. I saw the first humans, ancient ancestors gathered around fires, learning language, learning stories, learning names. The thing was there, not physically, watching, listening, learning, the same way it always had. The realization struck with devastating force. The entity wasn't trying to become human. It had been trying to understand humanity for tens of thousands of years. And every memory, every identity, every life it touched became part of that endless attempt. The vision shattered. I stumbled backward. The cavern returned. Gregory caught me before I fell. "What did you see?" His voice sounded frightened. I looked at him, then toward the entity, and for the first time, I wasn't sure who the victim was. The thing beneath Morgue 13, or everyone trapped around it. Then the ceiling cracked. A massive fracture split the stone overhead. Chunks of rock crashed into the cavern. The collapse had begun. The morgue was dying, and suddenly the entity spoke with urgency for the first time. Not calm, not patient. "The door is opening." Every corpse in the tunnel froze. Gregory's face went white, because he understood exactly what that meant. I didn't. Not yet. But I would. Seconds later, when something answered from the darkness far below the chamber. Something that wasn't the entity. Something older. Something that should never have awakened. And for the first time since entering the cavern, the thing beneath Morgue 13. For the first time since I had entered the chamber, the entity looked afraid. Not Gregory, not Sarah, not the dead gathered in the tunnel. The entity itself. The thing that had survived centuries. The thing governments couldn't destroy. The thing that remembered civilizations lost to history. It was afraid. And that realization terrified me more than anything else that had happened inside Morgue 13. Because fear only exists in relation to something. Something dangerous, something powerful, something worse. The cavern shook again, hard enough to knock several of the dead off their feet. Dust and fragments of stone rained from the ceiling. A deep crack echoed somewhere below us, far beneath the chamber, far beneath the entity, far beneath everything. And then it came again. That sound, not a roar, not a voice, a presence. The sensation was impossible to describe. It felt like standing too close to the edge of an abyss, like looking into an ocean so deep your brain refuses to comprehend it. Like realizing the floor beneath your house is only a thin sheet of glass. Something existed below us, something vast, something ancient, and suddenly the chamber no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a lock. The thought arrived fully formed. Not from me, not from the entity, simply an understanding. The morgue, the tunnels, the chamber, the decades of containment. They weren't built to contain the entity. The entity was part of the containment. I looked toward the giant shape, toward the countless faces flowing across its impossible body. And for the first time, I saw it differently. Not as a prisoner, not as a monster, as a guardian. The realization struck me so hard, I nearly staggered. Gregory apparently reached the same conclusion at the exact same moment, because his face drained of color. No, the word escaped him involuntarily. Thousands of eyes watching. Thousands of faces speaking as one. Now you remember. The old man closed his eyes. Pain crossed his features. Real pain. 43 years. 43 years spent guarding this place. And only now was he beginning to understand what he'd actually been guarding. The chamber trembled again. A massive crack opened along the far wall. Stone exploded outward. The sound rolled through the cavern like thunder. The dead in the tunnel began retreating. Not walking, running. Panic spreading through the crowd. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We have to go." Her voice shook. Now, I looked toward the entity. It remained motionless, watching the crack expand, watching the darkness beyond it. And for the first time, it looked small. Not physically, existentially, like a person standing before a hurricane. The darkness behind the fracture deepened. Not black, not empty, something else. The absence of definition, the absence of identity, the absence of meaning. And suddenly I understood what terrified the entity so much. Because the thing beneath the morgue collected identities, memories, names, lives. This thing below it was the opposite. It erased them. A terrible certainty settled into my mind. The entity remembered everyone. The thing below remembered no one. The difference felt important, vital, fundamental. The crack widened, and a shape emerged. Not a creature. A human-shaped absence, walking through reality. Every corpse in the tunnel screamed simultaneously. The sound nearly shattered my eardrums. Sarah collapsed to her knees, covering her ears, crying. The dead weren't screaming from pain. They were screaming from recognition. And suddenly, memories flooded my mind again. Not my memories, theirs, millions of them. For one impossible instant, I experienced fragments of countless lives. A soldier dying on a battlefield. A child learning to ride a bicycle. A fisherman watching sunrise. An old woman laughing with friends.
A man proposing marriage.
A scientist making a discovery. A teenager hearing their favorite song for the first time. Billions of moments. Billions of memories. Human lives. Human identities. Human experiences. All flowing through the entity. All preserved. All remembered. All remembered. And I finally understood what it truly was. Not a predator, an archive, the largest archive that had ever existed. A living collection of humanity itself. Every memory it touched became part of it.
Every identity joined the whole. Every life left an imprint. Not consumed, recorded. The revelation nearly broke me. Because everything I'd believed was wrong. The dead weren't trapped because the entity was cruel. The dead remained because the entity couldn't let go. It remembered them, all of them, forever. And now something had come to erase them. The human-shaped absence stepped through the fracture. The moment it entered the chamber, faces began disappearing from the entity's body. Not moving, not changing, vanishing. Entire identities simply ceased to exist. A woman, gone. A child, gone. An old man, gone, gone. Like pages being torn from an infinite book. The entity recoiled. The cavern shook. Thousands of voices cried out simultaneously. For the first time, I heard it scream, not in anger, in grief. The sound was unbearable. Imagine hearing every person you've ever loved cry at once. Every parent, every child, every friend, every stranger, all mourning, all grieving, all terrified. That was the sound. Gregory fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face, because he could hear it too. The loss, the erasure, the annihilation of identity itself. The human-shaped absence continued forward, slowly, calmly, inevitably, and everywhere it passed, memories disappeared. The dead in the tunnel began collapsing. Sun said,
Not dying. Vanishing. Sarah looked at me. Her face was already fading. The edges becoming transparent, like a photograph exposed to sunlight. Fear filled her eyes. Then she whispered something, the saddest words I have ever heard. I can't remember my mother's face. The sentence shattered me, because I understood immediately. She wasn't forgetting. She was being erased, piece by piece, memory by memory, identity by identity. The absence kept moving,
And the entity finally did something it had never done before. It stepped forward. The entire cavern shook. Thousands of faces turning toward the darkness, toward the thing beneath everything, toward the enemy it had been holding back for longer than human history. Then the entity spoke. Not to me, not to Gregory, not to the dead, to the darkness itself. And the words echoed through the collapsing chamber. They deserve to be remembered. Silence followed. Then the absence answered. His voice wasn't terrifying. That was the worst part. It was empty, emotionless, meaningless, like the universe speaking through a void. And it replied with a single sentence. Nothing does. The chamber began to collapse. The final battle had begun. And for the first time since entering Morgue 13, I understood what was truly at stake. Not our lives, not the building, not even the world, memory itself. Because if the darkness won, it wouldn't kill humanity. It would make it as though humanity had never existed at all.
The chamber was dying. Stone fractured in every direction. Ancient pillars collapsed into darkness. Massive cracks spread across the cavern floor. The ceiling groaned under impossible pressure. And somewhere above us, the remains of Morgue 13 were coming apart. Yet none of that mattered anymore. Because two things stood facing each other at the center of the chamber. The entity and the absence. Memory and oblivion. Identity and erasure. Everything else had become secondary. Sarah was fading. The dead lining the tunnel were fading. Faces vanished from the entity's body faster every second. Entire lives disappearing forever. And for the first time, I realized what true death might actually be. Not the stopping of a heart, not the end of consciousness. Being forgotten. Completely. The thought hit me with devastating force. The entity wasn't preserving people because it was hungry. It was preserving them because it loved them. Not emotionally, not personally, but fundamentally. It believed memories mattered. It believed identities mattered. It believed lives mattered. Every life. Even the smallest. Even the shortest. Even the forgotten. And now it was fighting to keep them. The absence moved forward. The entity moved to meet it. The collision wasn't physical. There were no claws, no explosions, no dramatic impact. Reality itself warped around them. Memories burst through the cavern. I saw fragments of countless human lives. A woman dancing at her wedding. A child opening a birthday gift. A grandfather teaching someone to fish. A nurse comforting a dying patient. A lonely man feeding birds in a park. Tiny moments. Ordinary moments. Beautiful moments. The things most people forget. The things that actually make a life. And the absence erased them as it moved. One after another. Gone. As if they had never happened. As if the people themselves had never existed. The entity screamed again. The sound shook the cavern. Thousands of faces appeared across its surface. Millions, billions, an ocean of humanity. Every memory it had ever protected. Every life it had ever preserved. All fighting against oblivion. And suddenly, the entity turned toward me. Not Gregory, me. Every face, every eye, every identity, watching. The meaning arrived instantly. Not words, understanding. It needed help. Not power, not strength. The realization struck like lightning. The entity couldn't force people to remember. That had always been the rule. Every connection required permission. Every conversation required participation. Every memory required acceptance. Which explained everything. The questions, the voices, the invitations. The entity never took. It asked, and humanity answered. I looked toward Gregory. He understood too. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked relieved, as though a burden he'd carried for 43 years had finally become clear. Then he smiled. A small smile. A sad smile. And handed me the black key. The ancient key he'd protected all those years. The key I now understood. It wasn't a key for a lock. It was a key for a choice. What do? I asked. Gregory looked toward the collapsing chamber, toward the entity, toward the endless sea of fading identities. Then he answered.
Remember. The word seemed absurd, impossible, meaningless. Yet somehow I understood exactly what he meant. The memories were already there. The entity wasn't giving them to me. It was showing me what humanity had left behind. Every life, every story, every person. And suddenly I stopped resisting. The barrier inside my mind fell. The memories came flooding in. Not one life, not 1,000, all of them. Humanity. For a single impossible moment, I experienced what it meant to be human. Not me. Everyone. Every joy. Every grief. Every hope. Every fear. Every first breath. Every final goodbye. Every act of kindness. Every act of sacrifice. Every moment of courage. Every moment of weakness, everything. The experience shattered me and rebuilt me because I finally understood something that the entity had spent ages trying to learn. No single life matters because it's important. Every life matters because it's unique, because it happened, because it existed, because someone loved, someone cried, someone loved, and therefore it mattered. The realization spread through the chamber. The fading dead stopped disappearing. Sarah looked up. For the first time, hope appeared in her eyes. The absence hesitated, only slightly, but enough, because oblivion has one weakness: memory. To erase something completely, it must first be forgotten. And now millions of memories burned through me, through the chamber, through the entity itself. A living act of remembrance. The darkness recoiled, not wounded, denied. The entity stepped forward
And spoke the final words of the confrontation. They were here. The statement echoed through reality itself. A declaration, a truth, a refusal to forget. The absence answered, "They are gone." The entity replied, "No." And every memory in existence seemed to answer with it. No, 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 no. The chamber exploded with light. I closed my eyes, and everything vanished. Silence. Complete silence. Then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on snow-covered ground. Morning sunlight filled the sky. Emergency vehicles surrounded the ruins of Morgue 13. The building was gone, completely collapsed. Nothing remained except rubble. Rescue workers moved through the debris, searching, calling out. The chamber below had vanished, as though it had never existed. I sat up slowly. My head hurt. My body hurt. Everything hurt. But I was alive. Several hours later, authorities searched the ruins. They found no underground structure, no tunnels, no evidence of anything beneath the morgue. Officially, a structural collapse had occurred. Nothing more. No one believed my story. I stopped trying to tell it, because honestly, I wasn't sure I believed it either. Years passed. Life continued. The world moved on, as it always does. Yet occasionally, strange things happen. Small things, impossible things. Moments that remind me of the entity. A forgotten photograph, discovered in an attic. An old voice recording recovered from damaged tape. A diary found inside a wall. A family story passed through generations. Memories surviving against impossible odds. Refusing to disappear. Refusing to be forgotten. And sometimes, late at night, I remember Sarah, or Gregory, or the countless lives I touched for that single impossible moment. And I wonder whether the entity truly died, or whether it accomplished exactly what it wanted. Because every time someone remembers a lost loved one, Every time an old story gets told again, every time a forgotten name is spoken aloud, something survives. Maybe that's all it ever wanted, to prove that existence matters, that memory matters, that people matter, even after death, especially after death. There is one final thing I never told anyone, something I discovered years later. A detail hidden among old hospital records. A detail that still keeps me awake some nights. When investigators cataloged the morgue employees following the collapse, they found no employment record for Gregory Miller. No hiring documents, no payroll history, no identification files, nothing. According to every official archive that survived, Gregory Miller never worked at Morgue 13. In fact, according to government records, Gregory Miller died in 1983, 43 years before the collapse. Exactly 43 years before the day I met him. And whenever I remember that fact, I hear a familiar voice in the back of my mind. A tired old man, laughing softly, and saying the same thing he told me during my first week at the morgue. The dead are easier to deal with than the living. Then the voice fades, but the memory remains. And as long as the memory remains, perhaps some part of him does too. The end.